Are you feeling stressed and fatigued and just tired? Maybe pulled in all different directions and completely overwhelmed, and it's super frustrating and makes you feel unhappy, and that feeling constantly being behind is just not fulfilling. Well, maybe you haven't set healthy boundaries yet, because if you don't have healthy boundaries in place, it's very, very difficult to perform at your best. It's really impacting your health and your performance, because when we set good, healthy boundaries, we do our brain and our body a favor. The brain has to keep us alive. That's its whole purpose. And to do so, it predicts. And if we're constantly reactive, constantly firefighting, constantly being available for others, and constantly saying yes to everything, and we're not having a clear understanding of boundaries, the brain has a really hard time to predict. It's constantly in survival mode. And if we're in survival mode, we can't perform. And we can definitely not perform at our best, because survival mode is all about survival. So healthy boundaries are extremely important. Now, I'm Heike Fallon, and as a personal performance coach, I work with my clients on setting healthy boundaries, because it's really a foundation of self-leadership. Because if we do have healthy boundaries in place, it reduces our stress, it helps us to focus better, our relationships actually deepen and become really more valuable. It helps us to, feel more confident. It gives us a sense of really empowerment, and even impacts our sleep, because who hasn't really, worked late at night and wanted to get that project done, and it compromised their sleep? And yes, that's okay if that happened once or twice, but if it's constantly happening, it does impact our health. There's so many benefits on setting boundaries, but the key part is it's got to be healthy boundaries. And what do I mean by that? Because if we're just setting boundaries and we're kind of blocking ourselves and maybe building more like a wall around us and constantly saying no and not evaluating what boundaries are good boundaries, because we still want to grow. So if we're setting like boundaries that block us and limit our personal growth, or may actually limit us too much in our health or too much in our performance. So healthy boundaries are really the ones that serve us to move forward for our goals and our vision. Now, sometimes these boundaries can be, in different areas. We're going to talk about that in a second. But the key is that boundaries are needed, and boundaries doesn't mean saying no and building up a wall. Boundaries means that they help you to keep you on track, keep you moving forward, and not getting you distracted or burned out. With that said, here are 5 strategies how to get started. Number 1, you need clarity. You need to first know really what your goals are and what your vision is, and I highly recommend close your eyes. Even right now, close your eyes, take a good deep breath, and just kind of check in with yourself and see how you're feeling currently. And then I would like you to think of, in 12 months, how do you envision yourself? When you have all your projects accomplished in 12 months, how do you want to feel? When you actually have set boundaries and you've actually managed a good work-life balance, how do you want to feel in 12 months from now? Keep your eyes closed and think about, that moment at the end of the 12th month, the things that you have accomplished, the things that, you feel good about, and how does that look like for you? Where are you at? How does that feel? Kind of check in. What is your vision? How do you want to feel? Do you want to feel stressed and fatigued and worn out, irritable, or do you want to feel really fulfilled and happy and energized? Take a moment and think about that. And I highly recommend to also write that out. So after this video, take a paper and pen and write it out. And also values. You do need to know your values. If you kind of roughly know your values, I also encourage you, write them down. Know your values, because you do want your boundaries aligned with your values so that you're not compromising your values. And another part is always checking in with your emotions. Do understand and check in and have that self-awareness of how are you feeling today? Like, when are you maybe frustrated? When does it show up? When you feel more tense in your body? When does, you feel more irritated? So what is your behavior and what are your emotions? So check in with that throughout the day so that you can tell when and where boundaries might be needed. Next one is exactly that. Identifying which boundaries you need, and it can be in different areas. So knowing though how you feel and where you might need to adjust something is very important, but you also need to know, because we might need physical boundaries, it could be mental boundaries, it could be emotional boundaries, it could be material boundaries, like if I gave somebody constantly money or constantly giving, and at some point maybe that's draining. Also internal, right? Like my self-talk, is there certain boundaries I need to set as well? And in conversations, right? Are there certain conversations that I like to maybe cut out because it's too stressful, or conversations that I need to go into very differently? And in other areas, for sure, time. Yes, we can all get sucked into bad time management, and oftentimes really good boundaries around the time and our productivity is extremely important. Once we have that done, step number 3 is setting the boundaries. So what you want to do is really think about not too many boundaries at first. Think about 3 and then pick one of the boundaries that you would like to implement. Keep it very small to get started, because ideally you want to implement and enhance that boundary consistently, because if we do it once in a while and then not again, people around us will not really respect our boundaries. It's very important that we rather start small, build up from there, and have other people though really realize that these boundaries are extremely important to us. And we can always expand later on that, but starting small and building up from there, being consistent with implementing them is very important. Know why you want that boundary. Why is that boundary important to you? And also check back with your values. As I said, your boundary needs to be aligned with your value. If you, again, putting a boundary up and blocking yourself in, and one of your values is connecting with others, but you putting walls up around you, you may not be aligned with your value there. So check back with your values and see how your boundary actually aligns with your values. And then take action, right? Write down what actions do you need to do, when and how and where do you need to implement this boundary, and what do you need to do. So sometimes it could be if you constantly get interrupted at work, maybe it's about, putting the phone out of the room, or closing the door, or turning all the extra windows off and just working with 1-2 windows on your computer. Whatever the boundaries are, but figure out ahead of time already when and how and where you're gonna implement that boundary, which leads us to the number 4 step, which is communication. Yes. We can have all the boundaries in the world. If we're not communicating with others what our boundaries are, they don't know. They will interrupt and step into our space, and it is even harder to enforce our boundaries if we don't communicate them very well. So highly recommend communicate your boundaries really well with the people around you, depending on if it's in your personal life or at work. But communicate them. And I highly recommend start with the I statement. Usually first step is describe the situation. For example, I feel frustrated, or I feel tired, or I feel disrespected or whatever it be, start with an I statement and describing how you feel or what your situation is. The second step in the process of communication is expressing your desired results, meaning what outcome do you want or what outcome is needed for you. So communicate that. So it could be, for example, if I get into, so my statement would be first, I feel frustrated if I get interrupted all the time, and, telling somebody else the results of what I want is, hey, you know what? Whenever my door is closed, I like you to respect that, because that means I'm focused, I'm working on something. So whenever my door is closed, please don't interrupt me, because that's what helps me to stay more focused. And the third component is really about letting the other person know what the consequences are. Because let's say you get interrupted a lot, tell the person, hey, you know what? If you keep interrupting me, then I'm not working at my best. It takes me much, much longer to get the task done, and it might not be at the best quality that I feel happy about. So express that, share that. Now, keep in mind, it's not about apologizing to other people. You do not have to explain and in detail exactly why and what and whatever. You have to just keep it simple and communicate it. Again, you don't need to apologize for your boundaries. The boundaries are for you to stay on track, to be healthy, to perform at your best. So you don't need to apologize for boundaries, because you need them. It's not selfish. Don't feel guilty about them, because it's needed for you to perform at your best self and to feel your best self. And keep in mind, people might not understand where you're coming from. They might give you a pushback. So be prepared to communicate and listen to pushbacks, but then also make sure you communicate exactly why that is so important for you. And at the end of the day, everybody wants you at your best self, because that's how you bring the most at work as well in your family. And the better you are, the better you can be for everybody else. So keep it simple. The fifth step, also very important, is reflecting on how it went by implementing the boundaries. It won't be perfect the first time. It does not work. Other people around you may have forgotten, so they just open your office door and storm in, and they forgot. Be patient, explain it again, stay calm, take a deep breath. It won't be perfect the first time. Maybe you communicated it not as straightforward. So just reflect and see when those boundaries worked out really well, when did they not work well. And also keep in mind, it does take time to implement it. It's a habit, right? Enforcing boundaries is a habit, and it does take some time. We just need to be really consistent. And boundaries can change, right? You might start with a boundary and realize, that didn't quite work out the way I wanted to. So you can change your boundary. And it could be also at a time that certain times you need certain boundaries, and other times you can let go of that boundary because you're in the next phase of whatever project you're working on or whatever your situation is. So keep that in mind. It's 5 steps that you want to do. You want to first be very, very clear on what you want, what your values are, how you're reacting, what your behaviors are, what your emotions are, so that you can identify what boundaries you need. Then you set your boundaries and make sure you put them in place wherever you need. You communicate your boundaries, very important, don't forget, and then you'll be reflecting on them. Hope this helped you, because healthy boundaries are needed for our well-being, for our happiness, fulfillment, but also to really thrive and work at our best and feel our best. So hope you implement this self-leadership tip and keep working on yourself, because it's all about feeling your best.